Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Greetings out there. William Pullin here. Welcome to From Beyond Not of This Earth. Tonight's topic is the Abduction Enigma. We're going to change up the format a little bit since, admittedly, it's difficult for me to go 30 minutes just hearing myself talk. And it occurred to my friend Mike Richburg, who is our special guest tonight, that a interaction between two individuals going back and forth discussing the topic would be a lot more productive. So, Mike, are you there?
Yes, William. Thank you for having me on.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you this evening?
I'm good. Just trying to stay cool here in Texas, though.
Another hot day in the American South, right?
Yes, sir. Agreed. You wonder if the aliens are coming because of the heat. I don't know. So
maybe
a little crispy. Yeah. So we discussed this at length, and I'm giving the viewers a little heads up as to what was transpiring. But you and I spoke a couple of days ago, and we're discussing this change in format. We both agreed it was a good idea. It was a great idea, actually. And the topic came up with the Abduction Enigma. And it seems to me that it's one of the more talked about issues in the UFO topic. I mean, everyone talks daylight discs and nocturnal lights, things like that. But when you bring up abduction, then it really becomes a topic of conversation. People really engage and have a whole range of ideas about what's going on. And so tonight should be an interesting back and forth, to say the least. So, yeah.
Absolutely, William. It's one of those topics that really grabs your attention because it's potentially a very serious matter, without question, and it's something that I think we will have a good conversation about. And, of course, we talked a little bit, but you have no idea what questions I have laid out here and I'm about to ask you, so we'll be getting your just kind of like a fresh take on each as we go along here.
We'll see what happens. But, I think from my own professional point of view, it's good to have questions thrown at you that you're not ready for, because your responses will tend to be more from the heart and from a first-hand or a gut reaction to the question. I think that's productive. It's kind of difficult when you get a question asked that you know is coming. You can kind of second guess your own answer. You can second guess your thought process, but not knowing the question coming in, I think is I like that format. So enjoy. So I'm ready.
There's something to be said for that. And as we jump into the conversation here, I would like to start, William, if we could just kind of outline what is the actual definition of an abduction in your mind, and what are the key factors that defines what that looks like? I mean, there's a line between having interaction and an actual abduction. Can you define that a little bit for me?
I tend to look at the UFO topic as a series of events, like going to the grocery store, like getting in a car wreck, like getting married. It's an event that transpires. It's just a little out of the ordinary, obviously, but it's still an event.
Obviously.
So, to my mind, an abduction is some scenario, and I'm gonna rationalize it in a very general terms. That are a scenario where you are taken against your will, either physically or in the mind's eye, somewhere where you don't want to go, by UFO occupants. That's very general. I mean, the abduction scenario used to be that you were taken from your car or your bedroom into a spacecraft, and medical examinations were undertaken onto your body against your will. it's kind of expanded beyond that. But I think abduction, like any abduction that a police officer might investigate, it's being taken against your will by forces other than your own. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Anytime you are removed from a location against your will, that would definitely probably qualify as an abduction. I just want to make sure we had some commonality with our terms there, because a lot of times you have a series of interactions, even at times reported, where it may be more of a voluntary situation from the witness or the person that has this experience. But in the case when we say abduction, it's definitely something that's against one's will.
Yes, yeah. The going, I guess, interaction with UFO occupants that is not against your will kind of goes along. It kind of makes you think of the contactee, where there's interaction that's precipitated by both parties, as opposed to one taking the other. So you do have that kind of self-reported, right. But the abduction is clearly against your will. That's the difference.
Well, William, is this type of thing commonly reported? I mean, like a lot of people see lights in the sky and that sort of thing. What kind of frequency or volume of reports are we talking about here with something like the abduction accounts?
Gosh, you have, if we combine the reports that have been filed with SAPRO, MUFON, and the National UFO Reporting Center, we're talking thousands just in this country alone. So we're a pretty voluminous amount of reports being reported. I just used reported in the same sentence. I apologize. And when we have a number like that, we also have to take into account that most UFO sighting reports don't get filed. Most people that see a UFO or interact or get abducted don't report it. So we don't know how many are out there. It's a big number.
That's right. What we only see is a certain percentage reflected in the actual events that are reported into some sort of formalized, maybe fill out a form on a website or that type of, which is obviously a small percentage in some cases, or potentially a small percentage.
Yeah, the investigation by various research groups, independent researchers, and we're talking civilian and military groups, have always attributed a 5 to 10% total of the cases reported that remain unidentified. When we whittle it down to
unsolved
abduction accounts, I think it's kind of the same percentage. We're talking about a small percentage of potential alien abductions. The rest are explained by other scenarios that do transpire in the human mind that may have characteristics that seem to resemble that sort of thing. And my first mind immediately goes to sleep paralysis. That does explain some, not all, but some accounts of abduction. Yeah, certainly.
Well, that's very interesting that you bring that up. That's certainly a factor. And I was going to ask, are there other possibilities like that could explain these types of phenomena or perceived to be that type of phenomena? In the case of sleep paralysis, there's certainly some bizarre symptoms and type of things that go along with that could confuse one into thinking something. It would be easy to connect the dots and jump to think you were being abducted.
Yes, certainly. Yeah. And beyond that, we have hallucinations. People do hallucinate all the time. Not all the time, but it does happen. Sure. It does. There is drug use. People do abuse drugs, and their mental processes are affected by that. That does happen too.
Certainly.
Hoaxing is a very small percentage. Virtually, statistically, zero. It's a very low percentage. So that's not an issue. And there's another scenario that's slipping in my mind, but just overall general mental illness, which is certainly a troubling scenario in the United States nowadays. That's part of the deal too. So so all those should be taken into account when examining this enigma, assuming that some of these cases are explained by things other than extraterrestrial contact, which does not mean it doesn't happen. It just means that we can't embrace an idea that like 80% of these things are explained by alien visitation. That's unreasonable. The data does not support that. So there are a lot. There are of other explanations. Yeah, it doesn't. So.
And we certainly, as serious investigators, must take those other explanations into account. All too often, people are very eager to accept accounts as they are interpreted or perceived by the witness or subject. But, there are other things, like you just explained, that could explain the phenomena. But at the core, the gist of what you're saying, there's still a core amount, a handful of cases, if you will, that compel one to believe.
Yes, that's that. You hit the nail on the head. Yeah, there's a core of reports that are strongly suggest, and I firmly believe it's happening, that alien abductions do occur. It's not very common, but they do occur. And but beyond that, the issue is that virtually everybody reporting these things are honest, intelligent people. They're not lying, but they're describing events that may or may not be alien related. And an investigator has to look at all these possibilities to come to some objective conclusion as to, is this alien abduction? Is this sleep paralysis? Was this a hoax? Is this a result of drug use? Those are all possibilities that should be taken into consideration. So a good researcher will look at they'll cover all their bases and see what happens after that. So, yeah.
Yes. You would certainly want to take all that into consideration. And also, when in trying to establish patterns and things like that, something you mentioned earlier about the large volume of cases in the United States alone, how does the global picture look as far as global distribution of accounts, if you will? In other words, is the United States fairly high on abduction, or Sweden real high, or South Africa, Brazil? Is there like geographical areas that stick out as being a fairly high percentage of abductions in the region compared to other areas? Are there hot spots, so to speak?
There seem to be hot spots, and I guess I'll preface my answer is that with the idea that since most sightings go unreported, our conclusions may be skewed. We may be totally wrong about it. But despite having said that, there seem to be hot spots. We can logically assume that countries that have a higher population density would tend to have more reports because there's more people there. That's a lot
higher density of people, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't always happen too. I mean, Britain has a good amount of abduction accounts. The United States does, but other countries like France, Turkey, Russia don't have a correspondingly high amount despite their population. So what's going on there? I don't know. Maybe partially because people are not reporting these things, or may not be happening over there. We don't know. But it's a worldwide phenomenon. Here in the States, people tend to think, maybe they used to. I don't know about now with the advent of the internet, but people used to have this idea that the UFO phenomenon was a United States problem. It's a worldwide problem.
Right.
And the abduction account, the abduction enigma, it's worldwide. Yeah, it's reported everywhere. There's hotspots. Beyond that, it's a very general problem. I don't know if there's really an area there where it's more prevalent per se. But certainly there's more avenues to report it in, say, the developed countries, Britain, France, United States, things like that. So that may skew the numbers too. But it's a worldwide enigma, and it's kind of scary. That's kind of a scary thing to think about.
Well, let me also put this in perspective then, if you will, help me put this in perspective. At the same time, as we look at geographical distribution, how about chronologically speaking? Is this a modern phenomena, or is this something that might go back in time and something that's been going on a while? What's your take on that, Wayne?
There are stories that suggest it happened prior to modern history. There's no way to substantiate those claims because they're hundreds of thousands of years in the past. So we can't, there's no realistic way to prove or disprove those claims.
Right.
The first modern abduction account that came to light was the Betty Barty Hill abduction from November 1961. Although there was one reported prior to that I think it was in Brazil, the Antonio Villa-Boas case, which was in 1958, I believe. I'm sure I got the date wrong, and I apologize to the listeners, but that case didn't come to light until after the Hill abduction came to light here in the States. But after that, it kind of blossomed. It kind of grew a little bit. There were more reports coming to light. But then the 80s hit, and when Whitley Strieber's book Communion was published in the mid-80s, then the reports exploded after that. So it's a fairly modern.
They did.
We're talking maybe 60 years.
Right. A fairly recent history, but that also would kind of parallel the UFO phenomenon to a certain degree. There seemed to be an uptake some 60 years or 70 years ago, maybe, uptick in activity, or an apparent one, based on the limited data we might have at our disposal. Roughly, since the late 40s, since we started flying rockets and dropping nukes, oddly enough, there seems to be a large burst in activity, and that would also be reflected in these so-called abduction scenarios. And when we look at these scenarios, William, and I want to stop and thank you for saying also, this is fantastic for me because there's so much that you have to share, and there's so much I'm curious about. So this is a tremendous opportunity for me to learn. And I'm really all about sharing of information and stuff and ideas. And I appreciate your time so very much. But
you're welcome.
When we look at likewise. And when we look at these abductions, are there patterns to the actual abductions themselves? Like, is there a certain kind of subject that's targeted, or somebody that does a certain routine? That it's like when you're driving out in an isolated roadway. Is that prime pickings, or we like to get them out of the bed, or do you see patterns there, that common traits in reports?
As far as the people who are being taken, there's no pattern there. It runs from black, white, Asian, male, female, Republican, Democrat. It doesn't matter. It runs the gamut. So there's no
do
pattern
not discriminate
there. No, evidently not. The initial reports were kind of went along the lines of a car on a lonely road. You're by yourself. It's at night.
Right.
You're taken to that kind of scenario. That kind of morphed into you're coming into the house and taking you from your bedroom or from your patio or what have you. And now you're taken from your apartment, or it's gotten more complex as time has gone on. I have no idea what to think about that. But the general description has not really changed. It's just the location has to some degree. Going back to your statement about the UFO enigma overall being connected to abductions, you're right. UFOs were reported, let's say during World War II, the Foo Fighters. So it was a good 20, 25 years before abductions began to be reported. And since then, now to my ear, doing research and interviewing witnesses, I get more abduction accounts than I do nocturnal light sightings. It seems abductions have become more prevalent and commonplace than just UFO reports. Again, I don't know what to think about that. I don't know if it's because they're popular or people are comfortable coming forward, but that's kind of what transpired. And I apologize, that was kind of a sidetrack. But, going back to the abductions, the scenario has kind of changed a little bit, but the general series of events hasn't. over the 50 some odd years has been reported. So it's kind of scary along this way. We have no idea what's going on, and things are being done to us against our will. That's a very scary thing to think about, because we as humans think we're the most advanced species on the planet, and we're being controlled by some outside force. That's very, very scary.
Yeah, that's an unnerving notion to consider.
Yes.
That's not, when you're not in control, that's not a good feeling. And typically, if they're doing any type of procedure or something unpleasant, that, adds further angst to the situation. And certainly a very traumatic experience, I'm sure, for many that might have been involved in this type of thing. And you mentioned them by name earlier, and I want to go ahead and wheel out Betty and Barney Hill. And then you and I talked about this very briefly a few days ago. In both your mind and my mind, and I'm very much a novice compared to you by any measure, but certainly the Hill abduction stands as probably the most compelling case for such a phenomenon. Could you just tell the audience, maybe for those who are not familiar with what happened, can you just kind of give us a general breakdown of the Hill case?
And I agree with your point of view. My position is the Hill abduction account is one of those rare cases of alien abduction, alien interaction. I think that's a cornerstone of the Enigma. Having said that, the Hills were a mixed race couple. Barney, I believe was he a postal worker? I'm drawing a blank here, but they were a mixed race couple lived in New Hampshire. This was November of 1961.
Yeah,
and they were on their way home from a short vacation in Canada, and they decided to drive overnight back to their home. And at some point, they sighted a UFO in the sky. They're traveling at night, so they saw a nocturnal light. They seem to be, which is difficult to discern because as you're traveling along, stars and planets seem to follow you along on your trip, and they're not, but that's how it's perceived. But this thing began to become larger and larger. At some point, they pull off the road, and Barney, through some binoculars, made some observations of this disc-shaped craft. He could see occupants inside. And at some point during that observation, he became scared. He had this feeling that they were going to take him. He had this feeling like he was being watched. And so he got back. They got in the car and sped off. And at some point, they heard what's been described loosely as a ticking noise. And that transpired for a while, and then they arrived home. Some while after they arrived home, they realized they were missing 2 hours of time. So they remembered a non-continuous event. They could not explain where the 2 hours went, and they were very troubled by that. Betty's dress showed some signs of being mangled on some level, like she had been touched by some other hands other than her husband's. There were some physical marks in the car, indentations on the hood. So there was some physical evidence there, which most abduction cases don't have. And at some point, they sought out some help to try to wrap their minds around what had happened. Eventually, they found a Boston-based hypnotherapist. His name was Dr. Benjamin Simon. And they underwent a series of regression hypnosis sessions. And separately, and what happened was that what Simon found was their stories rang true and were virtually identical, except for a few details, which were minor details. But they described being pulled, they felt compelled to pull off the road during this 2 hour period they can't remember. And they would pull off the road. They came across some men on the road, what they perceived as men, male figures, and were taken out of their car into a spacecraft. And a series of medical procedures were performed on them separately, including what was later described as a pregnancy test that was given to Betty Hill. This was several years before that test was actually known to medical science. So that's an interesting scenario there in and of itself. They were eventually taken back to the car. Yeah. Taken back to the car, and they arrived home. So they described the prototypical abduction account was described by the Hills. Barney described the aliens as being somewhat like grays, but they had cat-like eyes with pupils. They had opposable thumbs. They were wearing clothes, which he said reminded him of World War II era Nazi-style uniforms, which is interesting because most accounts do not have – grays are described as not wearing clothes. These UFO documents have uniforms. Very interesting. But you have multiple witnesses, Betty Barney Hill, describing the same thing under hypnosis, despite being hypnotized separately. You have physical evidence. Zero data suggesting a hoax. And to my mind, that solidifies the case as a cornerstone of the alien abduction enigma. Barney passed away before the year 1970. He died not long after that. Betty passed away in the early 2000s and was very active in the UFO community after Barney passed away. But along with the Travis Walton case and the Pascagoula abduction of October 1973, the Hill abduction is one of those cornerstone cases where, regardless of what you think of the other data, that case stands out. It stands out like a sore thumb. And the data strongly suggests and supports the idea of alien abduction. Despite what the other cases don't show, the Hill abduction does. And it's a fascinating case, fascinating. And there are detractors that feel it's not valid. I disagree with them vehemently. I think it's alien abduction.
It's a very compelling case for a number of reasons which you just mentioned. I mean, it's just, it really speaks to me. And for one thing, if somebody wanted to make up an elaborate story like that, it wouldn't be Betty and Barney Hill. And I'll tell you why I think that. And you probably know what I'm going to say right now. You got a mixed race couple in a time when they were already catching enough hell, probably.
Yes,
I don't think
agreed.
They would have any motivation for drawing more attention to themselves.
Absolutely.
That seems, illogical, excuse me. So, I mean, when you take all that, I mean, there's just so much here. I mean, all right, so Barney, he's looking through the binoculars at some point. He sees an occupant. And then it's my understanding this one of the occupants, like the leader or somebody on the craft, sends in some kind of, like, he gets a vibe, like, from this entity or being. And that's when he starts getting hysterical, thinking they're going to be abducted. And he runs back, and they're going to capture us, I think is what he told Betty, allegedly. So he immediately began freaking out, I think it's safe to say at this point. That's when it went from, hey, that's a funny-looking airplane to, oh, this is not good. There's like about 10 dudes over here that's going to capture them, and they're not human. And that's got to be a sinking feeling in your gut. What do you do? I mean, I just, feel for anybody that's in that position because, like with the technology gap, William, whatever's going on there, if they're more advanced, that they're coming here to visit us, and we're probably not going there to visit them. They're a long ways ahead of us, so there's not much point in trying to resist, I guess. I'm sure they have ways of manipulating things we don't understand.
Yeah, it seemed like they were in a helpless situation. It was going to happen no matter what they did. I mean, they can't. They're driving away from a UFO in an internal combustion automobile. They're not going to get away. So that you're right. Going back to Barney's description, he had this inkling that they were going to be taken. It was like a feeling he got when he made eye contact with the perceived leader of the occupant. And it turns out that was the leader that Betty later, under hypnosis, stated she interacted with. She had some level of nonverbal communication with the leader. During her testimony,
and I thought that was fascinating.
He showed her a map of the local star cluster around Earth, the 20 or so stars in the local group. And the map showed or displayed solid lines where the leader stated that they have regular trade routes between stars. Then some stars had jagged lines, dotted lines to other stars where occasional trips are made, but the distance is too far. Well, one of those dotted lines came to our star. And so, which to my mind, and I'm a pretty skeptical guy, but to my mind, that suggested that even for them, a trip here was a pain in the butt. Even for them, it was a logistical.
It was off the beaten path a bit, right?
Yeah, because it was a distance for them. It was quite an undertaking for them to get here, which speaks volumes. I mean, we had trouble going to the moon, which is only 3 days away. You know, they're talking 20, 30 light years. That's a little further. So for them, we were a off the beaten path trip. You know, and but you know, Betty described a less negative event than Barney did. Barney was clearly emotionally traumatized by his event. What he described, he was clearly in a bad spot. Betty, not so much. Once the initial shock, once the initial procedures were done, the interaction with the leader was much more cordial. She described a less traumatizing event, and that may have had something to do with Barney's death. Barney started suffering from ulcers, and he had health troubles, and it may have had something to do with his emotional state. But Betty, not so much. So
Betty seemed to be more clinical, or just more matter of fact about it, just more accepting of it. Like, oh, okay, it's an advanced race. There's not really I can do. Let's have a good talk while we're here. Wow.
Some people, everyone processes information differently. Scenarios that seem traumatizing to one person may not be for another. And Betty seemed to really handle the situation pretty well, so that allowed her to calm down emotionally and just, I guess, enjoy the moment, for lack of a better term. Barney clearly didn't. And that may have allowed her to...
Barney was not relaxed, no.
No.
When they come off the Batwing spaceship with the little black shiny uniforms on, that shook my man up there.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, perhaps. I mean...
Yeah. When they took him out of the car, they left their Datsun Delcy behind. Barney was dragged into the saucer. He was unconscious. Betty was alive. She wasn't alive. She was conscious. She walked.
She was conscious.
With the occupant. Yes, she was. And Barney wasn't. So his emotions got the better of him. He fainted. He was out.
Right. Which might have been like a self-protection, like self-preservation mechanism, whereas...
sure. Yeah.
The mind's had enough. We're just going to shut down for a minute here.
Yeah, there are snippets of the hypnosis recordings that are available on YouTube. And you listen to Barney's voice, and he is scared to death.
He shook up. He shook up. I've heard those before. And it's something I encourage anybody that would like to be, take the matter seriously and do some investigation. That should be pretty much Exhibit A right there, is go listen to Barney. Because Barney didn't take that too good. It shook Barney up. And I mean, it's like you can hear it in his voice, just like you said. And when you conduct enough investigations, you talk to enough people, you hear that real in my man's voice. I mean, it really traumatized him. So that's hard to fake or whatever. You've convinced yourself fully. If that's false, then he is fully bought in beyond any incredible tale. He's convinced himself it's real.
Yeah. And going along your line of reasoning, Dr. Simon, after finishing the hypnosis sessions, stated that they believed they were taking aboard a flying saucer. He did not believe it actually happened in reality, but he believed they did, which means they weren't lying.
He was convinced that they were convinced that they had experienced it.
Agreed. Yeah, he didn't believe it, but he believed they did. Therefore, they didn't lie.
Right.
So there's no sign of hoaxing there.
They weren't lying. Yeah, they were fully convinced.
They weren't. Yes, they
and I don't know how you mistake. Right. How do you mistake something else for that, though? That would have to be a series of hallucinations. We're all eating the same mushrooms out the same bag that night, or what? I mean, how do you even account for that?
Yes.
So it's very compelling as being like genuine in my eyes as a novice investigator. It's very compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, very compelling.
Well, let me ask you this.
The fact that they're under hypnosis, they described the same thing. I mean, they went a long way.
Separate hypnosis sessions, that should be pointed out. It was not simultaneous. Right. So, with having said that, and that's not the only compelling case, but that's just perhaps one of the cornerstones that we would be compelled to talk about here on the program. But in the bigger picture, like, why is this going on, William? What are they doing, man? Why do they want to abduct us, man?
My friend, I have no idea. And I'll be totally honest, I have no idea.
What the hell's going on, man?
I mean, I take everything from a scientific point of view. So it makes sense that if they found us, and I think aliens, I think they found us accidentally in the process of exploring the universe, or they might have come across one of our radio broadcasts. So it makes sense that to find out about us, they would take examples of our species to examine. We do the same thing with animals we find on Earth. So that's a logical way to look at the thing. Beyond that, there's ideas whether they're hybridizing us or they're trying to find DNA samples from us or whatever. I don't know. I think the most likely explanation is they're just trying to find out about us. They're trying to explore the science behind us. But I might be totally wrong. I have no idea. It's
so in other words,
aspect.
What you're telling me is the same way we would maybe catch a fish in the ocean that's a new species and document it. They would say, hey, look, here's a new species that ain't in our book over here on Earth. It's a human. Let's put this in the book. So I guess if you extrapolate that a little bit, and I hate to even ponder this, but did they ever take some back, for the zoo back home? Or anything?
Well, there are ideas that missing person accounts may be abductions that have transpired where the person being abducted was not returned. That's a possibility. I mean, we can't discount that. I mean, I don't know. That's impossible to prove because you can't go explore where they're at. I mean, you can't find out what's going on. But
can't prove or disprove.
Yeah, it's a possibility, certainly. I mean, people have disappeared from the planet Earth
the most
with no trace.
Scary thought of all. Just being kidnapped back to like, oh, congratulations, you're 382,000 light years from where you was at 20 minutes ago. So it's going to be okay.
Yeah. It's certainly
you live over here now. Right, so there's no coming back on your own or anything like that at that point. Whatever. Because, like, there again, however they're traveling, and, I won't turn this into like a physics or thrust debate or anything like that, like rocket engines or anything, but obviously, like, we're stuck in the window right now where we're using horsepower just to go really fast to do rocket stuff, right? So if you're going a really long distance in astronomical terms, of course, as you probably quite aware, and I've heard you references before, the kind of distance you're talking about, it's not even a horsepower issue. You just can't go faster. You got to have some kind of, like, trickeration going on. You got to have something that we don't understand yet, that you manipulate in a dimensional thing like a wormhole or something to bend space in such a way where you can go make point A and point B closer together, because you're never going to get there the old way like we do, because it would take you a billion years or whatever. So obviously the gap in technology is so vast. There's no way to resist this thing. I mean, I guess if you get a lucky shot off with a shotgun, but like you don't ever hear about that. Yeah, they tried to abduct me last night. I got 3 of them. Well, I'll give them hell. I got a piece of that spaceship too. You know what I mean? I unloaded some double on in that thing. But you don't ever hear that. What you hear is like, I was totally out of my will, against my will. They took me and did this and they did that, and they did these medical examination type procedures and things that are often very personal and invasive. So it's not a happy experience for a lot of people that report this type of thing. And there's actually groups out there that are support groups, if you will, for people that have suffered through this type of trauma. And there again, it is a trauma to many people. And that's why I make fun of people and stuff like that, because I'm a happy guy or whatever, but I take the matter very seriously. And I'll never make light of what is potentially going on here, because whatever it is, and William, you might agree with this, it's either real or it's not. So, like, if it's real, it's very serious. If it's not real, it's also very serious, because there's some kind of mass hallucination or something going on here. And I want to pose this to you. Do you think, based on all the factors, like with the geographical distribution and the chronological distribution and things like that, do you think that part of this thing is a cultural phenomenon?
Jacques Vallée has suggested that. I disagree. I think there's a core of cases that suggest strongly this is a series of events that are happening. Alien abductions have occurred. It's not commonplace that it hasn't happened. It has happened. Most cases are explainable by other beings, but the core is still there. And I think, has culture influenced it? Perhaps to some degree, but that has no bearing on the reality of it. I think it's going on. It's just not commonplace, but it has happened. Which is again, and I'm going to, I guess, backtrack a little bit what you said. I'm going to reiterate that it makes sense that these are intelligent, honest people. They're not lying. They're describing traumatizing, emotional, and negative events in their lives. They're traumatized. They're being harassed. They're being taken against their will. That's extremely traumatizing. Regardless of whether the event is actually alien abduction or not, they're describing events that have really happened in their lives, whether they've misinterpreted them or not, and they're reacting in a very negative way to them. Yeah, that makes it very important.
The trauma is real. That's right. The trauma they experienced is real. Whether the abduction was real or not, that could be debated. But the trauma, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is real.
Yes. The other issue along those lines in the UFO community, and I'll probably get pushback for this, and my research partner, Venus, same thing, she gets pushback too, is that the trauma is real. The events being described are being described by honest, intelligent people. They're not lying. That does not mean they're all alien abductions. It doesn't. It means they're all real events. They're traumatizing. But are all abduction accounts describing alien abduction? The data does not suggest that. It doesn't support that. It supports that some are.
The data is not there to support that. Right.
Yeah, it does not support that all are. No, it doesn't support 100% of that. No, it doesn't. But in the community, abductees who are reporting these things immediately go to aliens. They immediately embrace the alien abduction explanation. And that's unreasonable because it may not be. But approach them cautiously because, again, these are traumatized individuals. So it's a very difficult scenario to research from my point of view. But, again, these are real traumatizing events that are being described, and that is serious. That should be taken seriously regardless of the cause or not. Yeah.
William, is the data there to reflect, like, the millions of reports that some people in certain circles would have you believe is actually going on. I mean, thousands is one thing, but when you hear people talking about, oh, there's millions of people being abducted, is that really a feasible thing?
I would say absolutely not. No. I mean, if we're traveling to another planet, we discover a species of cat that lives on Mars. Do we need to capture several 100 million examples of that species to understand how it works?
No,
we wouldn't. We would.
You need 10 or 12 good ones, and we're pretty straight. Right? Yeah. I mean,
there's no reasonable idea. That's from our point of view. We're not very advanced. Would a more advanced species have to take millions of samples of a single species of organism, meaning humans, to understand how we work? No, that's unreasonable.
You would think not.
Yeah, you would think not. Of course, I could be wrong. I mean, we're talking about aliens here. We're not talking about humans.
Right. So well, we don't know. That's what I'm saying. We don't really know, but it's hard to say. The data's not really there, though, like I say, that would reflect that kind of volume. One thing I've always been curious about with this phenomenon is sometimes you hear where maybe like a particular family is being targeted for some reason, like repeatedly.
Yeah.
Where it's not just one subject, but the brother, the sister, the mom, and the dad. The whole family's being targeted with abductions, and maybe more than one time, like it's a recurring thing. So I have a two-part question for you here before I let you go tonight. And I want to know, is there any data that reflect maybe that is often maybe like a family experience? Are other relatives in the family being involved often? And the reoccurring part of that, does that go hand in hand with the family unit? And is there a reason behind that? Is there like a certain DNA profile or something? Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know, the data does support that in some cases. There are cases on the books that support and suggest strongly that some abduction accounts run along family lines. They're generational in nature. Yeah. But not all the cases. Some cases involve just a single person. Yeah. So there's a little of both there. As a little bit why, of both. I think in the cases that are describing families being abducted over generations, different individuals of the same family, I think it's a reasonable explanation might be that they're trying to examine several members of one family, which means their DNA, which means their genes would be somewhat similar because they're same bloodline. Beyond that, I don't know what other motivation that would have. But, yeah, it's a little both, as far as we know, a little both.
Well, it seems like, you'd have the DNA factor there with the common DNA and seeing how maybe the DNA worked within the family unit and how the social structure, maybe they would be interested in that to some degree. But you have to think, they're so advanced, they pretty much figured out our social structure in the first 5 minutes or whatever. I mean, it's not that complex or anything. So, it's hard to say other than going back to a DNA purpose or agenda, as some people might have you believe. And you touched on this earlier, and we didn't really talk about it too much. Now, often is the case where you hear about these so-called hybrids. And we can't have a show about this topic without talking about it a little bit here. So,
agreed.
William, I'm just going to ask you point blank. Do you think there's alien-human hybrids out there somewhere?
No. I don't think so. The science we're aware of, and again, that could be wrong. I could be wrong. That's the science we're aware of, shows us that diverse species, once you get, you can't have a chimpanzee mating with a dog, even though they're both mammals.
Right.
Species
that are too far removed.
There's a certain point where they're too divergent and they can't interact in that way. Right. They can't procreate. So would an alien species that evolved somewhere other than Earth be able to procreate with us? I The science does not support that, which doesn't mean I'm right. I could be absolutely wrong, but my gut tells me that's not happening at all. No. Could experiments along those lines be happening? Experiments conducted by aliens, along those lines? Certainly they could. We don't know what's going on, but hybrids walking on Earth, no. That's claimed quite often in the community, but that can be easily proven or disproven. I mean, take a blood sample and examine their DNA. If anything anomalous showed up, you'd have a hybrid, but that has not happened. So, in a word, no.
So, as far as you know, there's no great conspiracy to hide the blood results from the hybrids walking among us or anything like that. So we're pretty safe from a hybrid takeover or anything anytime soon here, probably. But you know, there's so many, right? There's so many theories in the community, as you're well aware of, that don't necessarily have a basis in so much fact as this gut feeling sometimes or opinion.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you're going to have that with any type of community when you talk about a subject like this. It's just part of it. But we have to bear in mind that in the end, ultimately, we have to go back to our science. And while we all do have an opinion, the facts remain that we don't have a lot of facts about the ET enigma, much less the abduction, segment of the overall enigma. So a lot of it is ponderance and limited data. There again, and I've heard you mention this many times, William, and you're spot on. If we had more data, you can draw a little bit tighter conclusions, but based on the data we have, there may just be a genuine phenomena going on here, and if that is the case, it's something we should not dismiss lightly.
Agreed. I think that there's enough data there that strongly supports the idea, firmly believe it's happening, that alien visitation has occurred and that alien abductions do occur. Neither scenario is very common, in my opinion, but it has happened. It has occurred. With their alien contact with humans has occurred. But you're right, with more data, the data allows us to arrive at some answers. We have no answers at this point. We have a very sketchy amount of data. We need more physical evidence. We need more testimony. We need witnesses to come forward in greater numbers and immediately with their testimony. It's vitally important. It really is very important. It may be the most important aspect of UFO investigations. We don't know a UFO event has happened until a witness comes forward. So come forward with your data. It's vitally important.
It's super important for people to come forward, even if they feel uncomfortable. And it's good to see people like yourself and Venus providing platforms for people to share their experiences. And that's always going to be a super important element. When you look at the whole abduction enigma, is there really... Should I be afraid, William? Should I be locking my door? Is there any point in locking my door and loading the shotgun, or is that just, panic on my part?
Yeah, I would lock the door and load the shotgun to protect yourself against humans. But against aliens, it's a waste of time. It seems to be that their technology, they're going to do what they want to do, regardless of what we do. There's no way to prevent an abduction. I've seen nothing to suggest that. So load your shotgun, but it won't do any help. It won't help you at all. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So, which is very scary. Very scary.
It's a very scary thing to contemplate. It surely is. When there's no point in locking the door if my man can just walk through the wall or whatever. So
that's not good. Not good.
Yeah.
No,
there again, it's a situation where you're not in control because you're dealing with something that's very advanced compared to where we're at.
Yes.
And that's a very frightening thing to many people. And just like our man Barney he couldn't process it too well. It's a difficult thing to process, especially like, you know, you just don't know how to take something like that, I guess. And it's just, some people can categorize it and process it better than other folks.
Agreed. Yeah. And going back to what we discussed at the beginning of the program, you know, being taken by force against your will and being put in a position where you're traumatized and emotionally distraught and you're being handled physically against your will, that by definition is abduction. By definition, that's alien abduction. And it's a very troubling issue that should be taken seriously by all, because we would never belittle a veteran with PTSD. We would never belittle a rape victim. Those subjects were taken very seriously, as they should. Alien abductions should be taken with the same level of seriousness. Absolutely.
Well, William, it's always a pleasure to talk with you about the subject. And we could probably go on most of the night here, I'm sure, but we probably need to let the folks go at some point. It's certainly been a pleasure to be on with you this evening. And I really would look forward to doing this again sometime, because I've had a super great time, and I've learned so much from you this evening.
Well, this change of format we arrived at, I think we're going to continue with this. This interaction is really good because it makes us both think about different possibilities. And all the listeners out there will either agree with us or disagree with us, but it makes them think, and that's important. If we all use our brains to think about what's going on, it allows us to process what's happening and wrap our heads around what might be going on. That's important. And, the more we think, the better. The more we think, the better. So, my friend, thank you so much for being on. So, should we wrap this up tonight?
Yeah, that's going to about do it for tonight. And I appreciate you, brother, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, sir. We'll have you on again next time. So for my friend Mike Richburg, this is William Pullin signing off for From Beyond Not of This Earth. Thanks to everyone for listening in. We'll be sharing this on multiple groups on Facebook and also on YouTube. So next time, everyone stay safe, keep watching the skies, and take care.